right, the fun stuff, market data. Anybody familiar with market data in physician compensation space? Know a survey? MGMA, probably heard of it.
Well, we haven't gotten to like that part of the physician market yet where we're talking about how those things are set.
So this is probably an area that's overused in physician comp. It's a private market. So how do you get information? So most people use what we call market survey data on physician comp. There's different sources for this. You can look at public data, private data, governmental data. It's really important, especially from a valuation standpoint. So if I'm using a private database that no one else has access to, it's hard to say that my arrangement is fair market value, because one of the standards for fair market value is that in order for me to say that a valuation expert can also replicate my work if they were given the same facts and circumstances. They can't replicate my work because they don't have access to my database. That's different from a fee service. So like MGMA might charge you money for that service. That's okay, but if it's still publicly available. So that's why that's important.
How much money, Eric?
MGMA, if you're like a single proprietor, maybe like 20, 30,000. If you're like an organization like Ludi, they might try to charge you $500,000 for their data. It's an area that a lot of people have made some money on and probably will change. There's a lot of organizations that are pushing back because the quality of data is not low and it's very expensive. Who reports data? You can get some Medicare data and the BLS. They've got some pretty cool data. It's not as detailed as you need, but they have the most amount of information. So you can see hiring trends every month. Healthcare has been kind of buzzing. Think about non-for-profit trade organizations. So that's going to be your AMGA, MGMA. For-profit, there might be some out there in this space. I know some are beginning to take PE money. And then there's for-profit consulting firms. So like SCA, Gallagher, ECG are probably the most notable in that space. Where is this data coming from? Is this self-reported? So you might see some nonprofit trade organizations like the American Association of like Neurosurgeons. Hey, let's just do a survey of our physicians. And then the physicians just, hey, I think I made $2 million last year. And they submit the data in. It hasn't been audited, hasn't been verified. So is it really trustworthy? So that's why we kind of, just when you're looking at market data, it's like, where is it from? How is it used? What are some of the metrics that you're looking at here? So compensation production. You might look at some background and social economic information. Compensation terms. So what does the comp plan look like? You might get some general market data, like the AAMC publishes like a really good report on how many physicians there are in the U.S., what specialty they are, how many are in the fellowship programs, what's their background, where are they? Yeah, it's they're really good actually on their information.
Use them every year when I'm updating.
It's good, right? Actually, I might need to talk. We're trying to get access to some of their data, so it might be good there. Claims data. There's probably Milligan. There's probably a couple other places that have huge data sets. Obviously, United Health and Optum have massive amounts of claims data, and people do analytics off of that and sell it to look at utilization and cost of care. Operational data. So how many APPs, how many front office staff. That's really dependent too. I think it's an area that doesn't capture the structure of arrangements. Fair market value. So this is just really used for fair market value, market competitiveness. So if I'm going to say, where are my family medicine physicians in the market between the 50th and 75th? Budgeting. We kind of went through this. MGMA data is probably the most commonly used in the marketplace. SCA is probably second. They charge a lot of money. ECG, AMGA, AAMC are probably the other most common in the marketplace. Gallagher is a for-profit consulting firm. And then you have BLS and then some other folks out there too. The metrics, we can breeze through this, but this is an area that's really important to understand the definitions. And I'll highlight this. So it's probably the most boring thing to do is when you open up the survey data is to go back and read the glossary of terms. Like, it's painful. I get it. Reason why it's important though. Total cash compensation. You might have a different definition on depending what survey you use. So if you pull up the MGMA survey, it includes cash compensation from every source that you have. So they do a lot more independent physician practices. So it includes medical directorship income, call coverage, production pay, quality pay. If you go to SCA, pull out their survey, it doesn't include discrete payments for call coverage. So you could have a scenario where you have a base physician, a physician that is required to do 7 days a month of call. It's built into their base pay. That compensation is reported into the SCA as total cash compensation. Same physician has to do 7 days of call a month, but gets paid a separate stipend for that. Say he gets paid $7,000 a month, $1,000 a shift. That money is not going to be included in the base pay. So understanding how they report it and what your provider is doing is very important there. Some of the other metrics: production, total work RVUs, annual ASAs, depending on your specialty, charges.
ASA? What's the ASA?
Oh my gosh. For anesthesiologists, it's the units. I think there's two components to it. Part of it is 15 minutes of increment time, and the other is like units, I guess, of like services. Yeah, it's only, it's not used very often, but that's how they get their fee schedule works. Charges, kind of antiquated, probably won't see that much. That's an old way. Encounters, and then panel size is probably the most common among family medicine now. You probably see some metrics of cash to production ratio. So like, what is my collections per work RVU? What is my compensation per work RVU? What is comp per an hour? So you're looking at these different metrics as well. And the reason why is you can look at this to identify, do you have gaps in your system? Do you maybe have somebody that's high producer and low compensated? Probably not good. So we went through this. What are the common pitfalls in survey data? A, definitions. You got to read it. B, if it's not verified. Another thing to think about too is we're pulling up data from the MGMA. It's not a representative of the entire U.S. It is just a representative sample size of the people who they surveyed. So you don't know if it's a relevant sample size. So to say the median comp for a family practice physician is $250,000 out of the MGMA survey, you can't say the median comp in the U.S. for family medicine is $250,000. Survey overlap. A lot of the people submit data to all the same surveys. MGMA, SCA, AMGA. If you look at the back of the surveys or you call them up, probably 60 to 70% of the people. So if you're trying to blend these surveys together, you're probably looking a lot at the same respondents. Misuse of data. This is one. If you think I'm a high producer, I produce in the 90th percentile of work RVUs. That does not mean my comp per work RVU should also be at the 90th percentile. There's actually an inverse relationship between the two. So if you're typically, what that means is if you're getting paid high comp per work RVU, it just means that you're not seeing a lot of patients, is that you probably work in a rural area or maybe just low patient volume. Maybe you're just ramping up your practice.
So what about, before we've got a little bit of time, but I'm interested in how these different structures are put together to incentivize physician behavior.
Yeah.
Whether you're incentivizing volume, value, things like that. I guess that's part of the strategy that goes into the compensation package, but what are some of those levers that you see? Yeah,
a lot of the times, most organizations are really focused on volume. So it's going to be work RVU driven. The biggest issue, though, I think organizations are getting a little bit more sophisticated because work RVUs have been distorted. So they don't look at it like it's time-based. It hasn't been very scientific in how they look at it to do the evaluation. I think if you saw the proposed physician fee schedule for 26, they went directly after the AMA and the proposal. They were like, we disagree with you on basically everything that you do, and we're just going to cut it down. I don't know if anyone knows how the AMA and the RUC works. They call it like a muck of the RUC. There's a committee of 36, is it? Or 30? There's like 29 physicians, mostly surgeons and specialists, get into a room and say, yeah, work RVU should be different for these procedures. And they jack them up. And then CMS usually accepts it. From, if we're going from incentives, you see a lot of how much of my comp should be base pay, how much should be based on metrics. Most of the time, only about 20% of the pay is going to be for quality. And I would say most of the pay is probably 50%, or depending on the situation, depending on what specialty you are. If you're like a surgeon or a medical proceduralist, it's probably going to be more eat what you treat, especially in...
So low base and more bonus structure for volume.
Typically, it could be, once you get ramped up, it's going to be comp per work RVU with 20% at risk, when we will do draws and advances on most of it. That's probably what you're going to see most of the time in urban areas that are competitive. Now, if you're going to start looking at more access-based models, that's a little bit of a different story. Like Paige, Arizona, it's like 3 hours away from any city. If you need orthopedic services, you're going to have to pay somebody just to be there. I see a lot more in team-based care, team-based with both APPs and physicians. That's been a hot topic, is why am I paying an APP and a physician that work together for the same work RVU? Now they're fighting over who gets to see that patient or the credit. Is there a way we can bring that together to get alignment? And then new patient volume is a metric that you see has been highly used for like cardiologists and orthopedics. So how many new patients can I get into the door as an area? And seeing what we call leakage. So if I'm a urologist, so thinking about where did my patients come from and where do they go? So urology and radiation oncology is one that's like they're in tandem. I'm going to pay both. I'm going to pay my urologist a little bit more on how many patients do they send to my radiation oncologist where the handoff was smooth within 48 hours. And then for the rad onc, were they able to schedule patients within 24 hours of initiation of contact?
But you somehow have to do that without triggering the anti-kickback statute.
Yes.
So
there's ways to structure it that go around it, but I'm seeing more focus on that type of stuff than just pay 100%.
Yeah, so the next class we're going to talk about like RVUs. We'll talk about the system that existed under that usual, customary, reasonable, or CPR if it was Medicare, and how those have changed provider behavior over time. And I was talking with Kristen yesterday as a part of a site visit with a third year, and she was saying that there are providers that are looking at the data that you're giving them, like you're giving them dashboards that update daily, and that they're changing their practice by billing more WRVUs and that kind of thing. And then the system that's hired them is questioning, that they've maximized their income and thinking about whether or not they should restructure how they pay because suddenly they're having to pay a lot more than they predicted based on the productivity. Yeah,
that's an area. It's like if you're going to pay somebody, you should have insights onto it. That's kind of like, that's also two things to think about when you're looking at employment offers. If you have a bonus, probably want to know, how do you calculate it? When am I going to get status updates on this? Am I going to know how am I tracking and where am I going? So those are things that we see in the marketplace. Once physicians know that they're going to be paid on work RVUs, they want to know how much they're tracking to so they can buy that new boat.
I think something else that's really interesting that we see across our client base is folks transitioning from their EHRs, calculating their final WRVUs, to using something as specific as our calculator that can be built with very specific house codes, modifiers, et cetera. And we're finding that a lot of the really popular EHRs that I will not name leave a lot of different specific codes out, or they overcompensate for compensation. So they might, attribute something for a bilateral procedure, but might not apply like a multiple procedure discount code. So these clients are coming in and they're like, help, we've been calculating this. We might think it's wrong, but we're not sure. And then we do our validation procedure with them, and they have to go back to their providers and say, hey, bad news. We've been overpaying you, and now your pay is going to change. And that's a really complicated conversation to have, especially when providers will soon have data in their hands that they can look at every day. So I think that's just been an interesting trend that we've seen, moving to something more specific, I would call it, than an EHR.
Yeah. Every organization's probably not paying if they don't use our product. They're probably not calculating work RVUs correctly. It's every year, the physician fee schedule changes, so you may or may not need to update it. There's payment modifiers. They usually don't get adjudicated correctly. And then you have the payment indicators for like bilateral procedures. And I think the wildest one I saw was we were doing due diligence for an acquisition in New York. They were gypsy adjusting their work RVUs. So I think in New York City, there was like 1.1 something. So all the work RVUs that they were paying were 12% overstated because they were gypsy adjusting their work RVUs. So that was a tough conversation to have. Like, we found some money, but not the way you want it to find.
So, in the bilateral, we're pretty much out of time, but like one of the examples of that is cataract surgery. So if you do both cataract eyes in one visit, you only get paid like 50% for the second eye.
Yeah.
And so a lot of providers won't do both eyes at the same time, that they stagger them so that they get 100% payment for both cataract surgeries. And yet that means more transportation for the patient, more time off of work for the patient, and things like that. So it's just really interesting how those systems incentivize the behavior, and that's really what economics is about.
Yeah, it's like that's probably a misappropriation of the economics, and it's not good.